Meet Merida, my wife's 2014 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited Sport. We've had her for like 4 years, I think, at this point, and she is pretty much stock. You've seen her in a couple of videos, like the bumper build with the winch install and the video where I took my wife out wheeling. Other than that, pretty tame build, but that's going to change in today's video. So what are we doing, you might ask? Well, first of all, we've got a couple cosmetic things that she's wanted done for quite a while. Some Quake LED undercarriage lights that we bought back at Bantam, which is in June. It's currently October. Things have been aging a bit in the garage. We've also got some maintenance stuff, like I've got a unit bearing that needs to be replaced on the front axle. I've got a cool new tool to show you for that if that works out. I might have a Tom Woods Driveshaft to put on the front of this, but the big thing we're doing is a Metalcloak 2.5-inch true dual rate suspension lift. So that's going to go underneath this thing. Hopefully it'll fit in my garage when I'm done. Couple things we're going to be doing in this project is, one, I got these Quake LED undercarriage lights. They go in the wheel wells. One of the drawbacks was I needed a good way to put a switch on these things so that you could turn them on and off. So that led to, how do I put a switch in a JKU? And of course I ended up with a switch panel. This is an Auxbeam switch panel. It's much cheaper than the sort of more expensive but more common routes that people are taking nowadays. Probably doesn't have as many options, but I think that's going to be just fine for what we're doing.
All right, so we ordered the True Dual Rate Rock Sport Edition, which comes with the Rock Sport shocks and whatnot. I'm just going to go through all the stuff that came in the kit. It comes with an adjustable track bar for the front of the Jeep. That's right here. And that's pretty important because if you're not changing your pitman arm, you need to keep the geometry of the front end, and this will help you do that. We also have adjustable upper control arms, and this is important for adjusting caster on the front axle. We've also got these outboard shock mounts. These are to put your front shocks in a better position. I ended up not using these because I don't have aftermarket wheels, and the position they put your shocks in, it would have rubbed my wheels and tires. So once I get wheels and tires, I will install those as well. Of course, you get 4 shock absorbers, the Rock Sport editions here. These are sort of the middle of the line as far as shocks are concerned. You can go to Fox shocks. You can probably also get their 6-pack shocks. Of course, there's 4 coil springs. These are dual rate coils. There's also these coil spring isolators, which I think I forgot to install when I did the kit. I'm going to have to go back and fix that. We get bump stop extensions for the front and the rear. These are pretty easy to install. Sway bar links. This shows sway bar links front and rear, and they do not look like they are disconnects. In my kit, I got sway bar disconnects for the front. The rear, I did not get. I got actual spacers that they take the sway bar itself and move it away from the frame a bit, which I think is just the way that they do it. I don't know if this picture's old or what. Front extended brake lines and rear brake line extensions. These take the hard line from the frame and move it down a bit so that you can extend it. Mine were missing in the kit. I contacted Metalcloak and they were very happy to send me another set.
Okay, this is the exhaust spacer kit. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I'm probably going to be doing a drive shaft, which will mean I won't or shouldn't need this spacer kit. All right, and this I think is the track bar mount kit. Lower rears. Wow. That is a beefy bracket. No wonder it's in such a big box. That's all that's in there. It's a pretty cool looking bracket. This looks like it goes around the axle, and I don't know what that mounts to. That's pretty awesome. This is more than just a little spacer. I mean, I'm impressed by this.
Anyway, so that's what comes in the kit. So if you've got the same kit, these are all the pieces you should have, and they have a better understanding of, what goes where and why.
I just did a unit bearing because, one, well, it was due for a unit bearing, and 2, I had a tool to test out. So if you want to see the Orion Motor Tech unit bearing removal tool in action, I'm going to link a video in the description of this video. You can go check it out. I just did that, and here is the result. Brand new unit bearings. Now, this is probably going to be rusted to hell and not want to come out of here if I had to guess. Holy crap, it moved. Guys, I just ruined all my good karma for the rest of this project.
All right, so we're going to start with disassembling the front because I like to start with the front because, I don't know, it's easier to film. You're going to have to remove the front track bar, the sway bar links, the brake lines. Maybe you want to hold off on the brake lines until you're ready to actually put the new ones on, just so you don't leak a bunch of fluid everywhere. The upper control arms, and the shocks. As you start to remove this stuff, your axle is going to be more and more free to move, which is both a good and a bad thing. If you don't plan for that, you could end up with your axle kind of like falling, and that could be bad, so be careful with all that.
Rock on!
So these front brake lines are pretty easy. If you've never done brakes before, it might seem a little intimidating, but there's a bracket. Part of the brake line itself has this bracket attached to it that goes on down where the bottom of the coil is on the axle. There's I think a 10mm bolt you take out, and then that comes out pretty easily. Once that's out, the wheel speed sensor cable is clipped to the brake line itself. You're going to have to unclip all of those. Then there's a 10mm bolt that holds the upper bracket for the brake line to the frame where the hard line attaches to the soft line. You got to remove that bolt. And then the flare nut on the hard line is a 12mm. I hit these up with some PB Blaster, and then they came free pretty easily for me. So hopefully you do not have any issues. But if you do, sometimes you can use heat to get them to come free, but just be careful because brake fluid is flammable. We don't want to be burning your Jeep or your garage down in the process. Then, of course, there's the banjo bolt at the back of the caliper. You just take the banjo bolt out, and then the brake line comes free. Installing the new line is pretty easy. There's a bracket that bolts to where the bracket on the frame was. It's just a very simple, like L-shaped bracket with a large round hole in it. Then the brake line, the fitting from the brake line at the upper end goes through that, and there's a clip that holds it in place. Once that's in there, you can tighten in the flare nut from the hard line into the soft line, the new brake line. And then on the caliper end, there's sort of an L-shaped hard line that attaches to where the banjo bolt goes. The banjo bolt now gets 2 brass washers, one on the front and one on the back, on the other side of the fitting that's on the other end of the brake line. Of course, when you're all done with both sides, make sure to bleed your brakes, and that does that. Oh, don't forget to tie the cable for that wheel speed sensor back onto the brake line. I just used zip ties in the same locations where the clips used to be. There's no clips on the new line, so I just zip tied them in place. But make sure they follow the line up and there's no weird kinks or weird slack anywhere.
If you've never seen an adjustable control arm before, it's dirt simple. It is a control arm. One end is adjustable. There's a big jam nut on here that lets you set the length. Now, I like to put anti-seize on these threads. Doesn't look like they've included any on here. So I'm going to unthread the ends and put on anti-seize. These threads will, over time, get grime in them, and dirt and mud, especially if you do water crossings and whatnot. I mean, that's just the name of the sport, right? That's what we do. We put these things through hell. So I'm going to give these a liberal coating of anti-seize. Not too liberal. Not like Bernie Sanders liberal. Sorry, did I say that out loud? The instructions say, I think it was 18 3/8, and I'll verify that quick, but 18 3/8 is the length you want for these arms. I didn't get any anti-seize on my hands, guys. I don't know how I did that. It's gonna happen when I measure them or something. It's going to happen. Guarantee. You measure it eye to eye. So from this eye to this eye. I usually go to like the inner edge of this eye to the outer edge of this one. You can go center if you're better than me. Doesn't take much to adjust these things. And I recommend a better work area than the top of a cardboard box. Maybe like a workbench. Okay, we're at 18 and like just shy of 3/8. We're gonna go like 1/2 turn out, I think. 18 and 3/8, bang on. All right, now they say to hand tighten the jam nut for now. You're gonna be careful not to move anything as you're hand tightening it. But I get the feeling, the reason we're hand tightening now is because once this is on the Jeep, you may end up fine-tuning it. These go on much as they came off. I like to do the upper first, the upper end, the frame end first, because it's a lot easier to move the axle around to try to get alignment for the lower end. Now you are reusing the factory hardware, so I hope you didn't lose that. Mine's all in right here. This should be the lower. Make sure it fits through there. I had a set of control arms for the TJ that I had to drill out the mounts and get bigger bolts because the eyes in the control arms were bigger. I don't know why that was, but I'm going to try to do this without having to climb underneath, but who knows how that's going to work. So I'm going to put that there, find the hole here. It's way up there. I might have to climb underneath. Where is it? There it is. There's my finger in it. The jokes write themselves, guys. There we go. Now, can I get the nut on the back? Is the next question. Haha! It's almost like I've done this before, guys. Almost. Now I'll probably end up with more never sees on my hand from being this close to the jam nut. Nope. Haha! I have succeeded. All right, now you can see, I hope you can see, that doesn't quite line up. That's because the axle has no control arms on it and it just tilted wherever the hell it wanted to. Now we should, maybe using the jack, be able to tilt it backward just a little, just to get this guy back through it. So let's see if we can do that. Getting there. Cool. Just about anyway. There's one. Put the nut on it so it doesn't fall out. Now the other one should be super simple because it should already be lined up. All right, so the next thing they want me to do is put in these bump stops. Now, the bump stops are sort of selectable. They're puck, double puck. Nope, they're just stuck together. Puck. They're a bunch of individual pucks. And what they do is you put them on here, you drill a hole through the center of this bucket, and then you have to get a nut. Oh my God, that's going to suck. You drill a hole through there, a big old bolt goes through it, nut on the bottom, and that's your bump stop. The bump stop has two purposes. One is to keep the axle from contacting like frame and whatnot. That shouldn't happen because this bump stop's already here. The other thing it does is it makes sure that your shock doesn't end up being the upward limiting point of your suspension, because that could damage your shock. If you put too much weight on the shock, it could damage the body and whatnot. You don't want that to happen either. So really, my goal here is to make sure that the bump stops prevent the axle from crushing the shock. Of course it made 2 because it moved a little. I'm going to redo the middle one. If I hit hard enough, maybe it'll just go through it. They say we need a hole anywhere from 1/2 to 9/16. So I figured these stepper bits will be good enough. Now the dang bump stop's in my way. Figures it should be good, I think. Let's drill a hole. There we go. I'll probably clean that up and hit it with some paint, just for the sake of, you know, paint. Paint's a good idea. But yeah, this is in effect how this works. There you go, roughly in the center. That should do the trick. Now the spring sits way around here, so this doesn't have to be perfect. But that's the idea, right? You stack them up. They give you a bunch of different length bolts based on the number of bumps you're going to put in there. So if you're going to use them all, you'll need this big long guy, which is what I don't know, what I think I might end up using. And there you go. That's how that's going to look when it's done. All right, so I took a little bit of a break for lunch because well, 1, I had to eat some lunch, but 2, I got those holes drilled for the bump stops, and then I threw some paint on them, and I wanted to let the paint kind of dry up. It's still a little tacky, but you know what? This ain't perfect, so I don't really care. It's a little tacky. But what I'm going to do now, since that will take a little bit longer to dry, I'm going to jack the axle up to the point where it's at full stuff. And then I'm going to measure how far I need for those shocks. And that should give me a better idea how much bump I need. I think I did something wrong, because it doesn't make sense that for a 2.5 inch lift, I need 4 inches of bump. You'd think I'd need like 2 inches of bump, but we'll see. Right now, full stuff. From the bottom of that to the mounting point is like 17 inches. What did I say? 19 was my goal, 20? So what's 20 minus 17? 3. We're going to put 3 pucks in. So you might notice a slight difference here. I have a spring in now. And now I have it supported on a jack by the axle, right? And I'm just checking clearances and stuff, and everything looks good. I mean, I expected it to, because this is an off-the-shelf kit. There shouldn't be any crazy custom fab or anything I have to do to make this all work. I can measure this to figure out what ride height is, right? From the coil bucket to the coil bucket, right? From the frame coil bucket, coil tower, I guess, coil tower to the bucket. And then once I measure that, I can take the spring back out. Then I'm going to lift the axle back up to ride height with the frame on the stands, of course. And then I will put stands underneath the axle. And then, with everything supported by stands, I can disconnect one of the upper links and then use the other upper link just to do adjustments, right? That should let me adjust caster. 12 3/4. Remember that.
All right, now we have to slay the boogeyman, which is caster. Caster is the angle that your steering knuckles are as compared to 90 degrees from the ground. Okay, so the C at the end of your axle where your ball joints mount, if you were to imagine the ground is 0 and a right angle up from the ground, if that went directly through both of your ball joints, you'd be at 0 degrees of caster. The further back the upper C or the upper ball joint is toward the rear of the vehicle, that's positive caster. And the further forward it is, that's negative caster. So if it's going toward like the front bumper, that's negative caster. So you might wonder, why is this so important? Well, caster affects a number of things. It makes the vehicle just feel better when you're driving it because the steering wheel will return to center in a more positive way than if caster is not set up properly. It also affects just basically normal steering characteristics, but most importantly, it's one of the contributors to death wobble. Ideally, you want a positive caster of between 4 and 6. Metalcloak recommends right at 5. Okay, now I've linked a article in the description of this video that describes how to measure this on the JK axle. The JK axle has a flush pinion flange that the driveshaft mounts to, which makes it really easy, really good point to measure caster to, or measure the degrees of caster. There are 6 degrees of separation between that flange and the C at the end of your axles, right? Axle housing. So there's basically, if you were to imagine that 90 degrees, except it goes through the pinion and through the C, then go back 6 degrees, positive 6 degrees, using the same thing I described earlier toward the rear of the vehicle. There's 6 degrees of separation. So if the pinion flange is at 0 degrees from the ground, then your caster is at positive 6 degrees. So in order to fit what Metalcloak wants us to do here, you want to take your angle finder. I use a digital one. I measured it to the ground, and then I put the forward face of the angle finder, because it's a square, on my flange, and then I moved the axle forward until it read positive 1 degree, or I should say negative 1 degree. 1 degree toward the front of the vehicle, right? So that should put my C, my ball joints, at 5 degrees of positive caster. Once I got that dialed in to where it needed to be, I locked in the jam nut on the control arm that I was using to make the adjustments on. Then I went to the other side of the vehicle and I reconnected the control arm over there, and then locked in the jam nut over there as well. And boom, caster is set. So look, I'm going to be honest, this always happens to me. I'm filming along, doing a lift kit install. I get the front all really well covered, and then in the rear, I'm just burned out and I want to get it done. So I didn't get as much footage of the rear. I mean, it's harder to film the rear in my garage setup. It's toward the end of the project always. I'm not going to apologize, but I did want to at least cover the rear of the kit. Disassembly is actually a whole lot simpler than it is in the front, because I'm not doing any control arms in the rear. You've got to remove the shocks, which means there's bar pins to deal with. Luckily, Jeep made it easier. You can actually get to the back of the bolts that hold the bar pins in, and you can soak them with PB Blaster. That's exactly what I did. Same deal with the sway bar. The sway bar mounts to the frame on the rear. Metalcloak gives you spacers that have to go in between where that mount is and the frame, right? So you have to disconnect those both ends of the sway bar, both at the frame and at the links at the axle, because you need to move the whole sway bar underneath the exhaust, because it is above the exhaust before you put the spacers in. It won't clear unless you put it under the exhaust to put the spacers back in. Then, of course, there's the track bar in the rear, which has a new bracket that relocates the lower mounting point, that is the mounting point that's at the axle. So you need to disconnect it from the axle side. Once that's off, and the shocks are off, and the sway bar is disconnected, you can actually drop the axle out far enough that the springs basically just kind of fall out. Now, I did have to monkey around with the emergency brake cables. They're tied up in like a bracket that's underneath the body. I had to, I think, pull them out of the bracket so that they kind of hung loose. They're not dangerous loose, but they're not tied up like they used to be. Otherwise, you don't have enough flexibility to get the axle down low enough to get everything out. Plus, it would have impeded, suspension travel afterward anyway. So I don't feel so bad about that. Once everything's out, the bump stops in the rear are actually really simple. They're just flat spacers. I used 3 in the rear, just like I did in the front. And they go together with like construction screws. They just go straight through the pads and into each other. And then you bolt them to the pad where the bump stop normally hits on the axle side. The brake line relocation, that's another thing. I should have mentioned that before you drop the axle down, because you could damage your brake lines, but you want to disconnect those from the frame. The relocation brackets are just extensions that move them further away from the frame. Once you get it all back in place, really the biggest job is that track bar lower relocation bracket. There's a U-bolt that goes around the axle tube, and then that little arm that comes down from it bolts to the lower control arm a lower mounting bolt. It mounts to there so that it has a nice, good, solid mounting point. And then, of course, it mounts to the existing bracket where the track bar mounts to. And then you've got a couple of adjustment holes for where you want to put the track bar after it's put back together. All right, so it's Driveshaft time. I thought this was going to be a bear. So far, it's surprisingly easy. So I happen to have this enormous socket set. This is 1 1/4 inches. I have to get this yoke off. There's a big nut in here. It's already loose. It took less effort than I expected to get this to come loose, which tells me it wasn't Loctited. So I need to find out like what it's supposed to be torqued to. But now I got to get this yoke off. This is that Resepa joint yoke. I'm going to try to kind of tap it with a hammer and see if it comes off of there. I don't think there's anything else going on in here that'll prevent that. The Tom Woods drive shaft comes with a new yoke for the CV joint. So, got to get this guy off. It's off. Surprisingly easy. Again, here it is. I hope this is all that was supposed to come off, because this is what came off. It was on there like that, right? You saw it before. I took my brass hammer, which is not only better for steel, because it won't mar it as easily, but it's heavier than my ball peen hammer, and I just kind of hit it here like that, except, you know, better swing, and it came off pretty easy. So I'm going to go compare this to the Tom Woods yoke and make sure this flange on here isn't some kind of a seal that I just popped off when I shouldn't have. I hope not. And then we'll go from there. So that's the Tom Woods yoke. This is the Resepa yoke. They look like they're about the same diameter-wise. So, I don't know. What is this thing? This does appear to be some kind of a seal, doesn't it? Do I need to pull that off of there? I don't know. I'm going to have to look this up. Right here, it says that the slinger/shield that's on the original yoke will not be reused. All I really have to do is put the new yoke on. I'm going to read through these instructions here. You should get these if you buy the same drive shaft. And I'm going to look through these and make sure that everything seems to be in order, and then I'm going to put things back together. All right, so the instructions that came with this thing told me what to do with this. Basically, the Resepa yoke had a slinger that was pressed onto here, and that also acted as a seal. So any fluid that seeped past the splines would get caught by that and, I guess, retained, just the way that worked. So what they say to do, since this does not have a slinger, and they say not to reuse the slinger, what they want you to do is take silicone seal and put a bead around the inside here, such that when you put it on there, it kind of presses into these splines. So I'm going to do that. I've never seen it done that way before, but they are the experts. I'm going to believe them. So we're just going to cut a little opening here without cutting our finger. Maybe a little bigger than that. All you Boy Scouts watching me are telling me that I'm getting my totem chip taken away, right? For doing it this way. You know better. I know better. Anyway, okay. So I just picked up some Permatex clear adhesive sealant. This should be just clear silicone. They say to use silicone RTV, or they just say to use silicone. I don't know if you can use just any old silicone. I got automotive silicone, since this is what gaskets are usually made from if you're doing like liquid gasket, right? So alright, we're just going to make a little bead in here. And this basically goes on to the front output shaft on the front of the transfer case. And this should squeeze in there and make sort of a seal. I don't know how important it is that this is a super great seal, so I'm just going to like coat it in here good. And there we go. Like I said, alright, I'm going to have to do something about that, but you don't need to worry about having that on video. Alright, now I'm going to go put this on that output shaft.
and we're going to hope for the best. So this is not all that exciting content. I'm just going to try to get this on here without got to get the splines to line up here. This shouldn't be hard. I don't know why it is. There. I don't know if it's keyed or something. All right, and that just slid right on. I do have my brass hammer here just in case, but I don't need it. Got a little bit of goop on the threads, but that's okay. All right, and now this guy is an 1.25 inch nut. Now, they say to torque this to 160 foot-pounds. I don't have... So I've got this big nasty ratchet here. It's a 3/4 inch drive, and I don't have a 1/2 inch socket that's 1.25 inch, and I don't have a 3/4 inch torque wrench. So I'm going to go with the super scientific good and tight method, because this doesn't have a crush sleeve or anything stupid to deal with. I'm hoping that that's going to be good enough. But if you're going to do this, get a torque wrench or a socket for your torque wrench that'll fit, and do it the right way. Don't be like Nate. Yeah, we'll go with that. Okay. Oh yeah, thread locker. I'm going to put thread locker on these threads. You can see I've already got it locked into 4-wheel drive, so this doesn't spin. But yeah, thread locker goes on these threads before you put the nut on.
Light modules for the Quake LED. Pretty well built, I think, anyway. They have this nice metal kind of frame to them, and they've got RGB LEDs behind a nice protective lens here. They come with like a rubber isolator. The light mounts into the rubber. There's two different isolators. One of them is sort of curved, so you can mount it on a curved surface like a roll cage or something, and then the other is flat. I'm going to be using the flat ones underneath. I decided to put them in the upper parts of each wheel well, the front and the rear. There was a nice flat spot in the front, and in the rear, I kind of went up out of the way to the inside, but up still on the flat surface at the top of the rear wheel well. The wire routing was a little bit of a challenge. In the rear, I went up through one of the rear drain plugs. The drain plugs are kind of oval shaped, and they have almost like a two-sided divider to them. I got sort of a plus-shaped relief into the drain plug on either side, and then I was able to push the connector for the Quake LED up and through the drain plug. And then the control box, I decided to mount underneath the driver's seat. The front, on the other hand, was a little bit more difficult. I did discover from doing some searches online that there's this cool little access port that Jeep, whether they left it there on purpose or not, left through the firewall right behind the end caps that are on your front dash in the JK. They're just kind of like a foam-filled hole that you can push a Phillips screwdriver or maybe like a drift or something through, and then you can get wires through it. The only real trouble I had with that was the connectors for the Quake LED were just too big. I couldn't get them through there along with my fish. There just wasn't enough room, so I had to end up cutting the ends off of the Quake LED connectors and then splicing the wires back together when they got to the other end. And then, of course, I had wires for things like the Quake LED, power for the control box that I had to get through the same access point, and a few other things ended up going through there, like the wire for the control box for the Auxbeam switch panel, which ended up on the dash. Then I had to figure out where to put the actual relay box for the switch panel. Now, it comes with this nice solid-state relay box. I had things in the way, so I couldn't mount it where everybody else does, which is there's a sort of angled bracket that comes with the unit that a lot of people just mount to the inside of the driver's side fender around where I have the vacuum module that was behind my front bumper. So I ended up sort of crafting a bracket that piggybacked onto the mount that I made for that vacuum module. Just used some scrap steel that I had laying around to make an arm to sort of intersect, and I made this like weird triangular thing where I was able to mount using one of the brackets that came with the relay box and then this mount that I made. And in the picture here, you can see it's not painted, but I have everything mounted, but nothing's wired yet. I'm down here working, doing stuff. I got a bunch of things done. Sorry, I didn't film any of it. Here, I'll show you. So I got, ignore this mess. I got this all wired up. So I made the little bracket I was talking about. I got it painted. Got the little breaker box mounted on here. I got the little connector box that I already had in place mounted on a little tab out here. Good and solid. I mean, it moves a little bit, but it's not a big deal. I got all the wiring to the battery done. I got the wiring into the cab. This has to be tied up and stuff yet, but that powers the Quake LEDs. They're all wired up to one of these 10 amps here. That actually works. Here, I'll show you in a sec. I'm working on the bullet point mount at the moment, and then I think I'm done for the night. But here, there's that. This is the Auxbeam switch panel guy. This button here turns on the LEDs. And then, of course, there's the actual switches that have to mount inside. So as I mentioned before, I got this bullet point mounting solution for the dash, and I decided to mount the panel to one of the ball mounts that came with it, like a general ball mount that came with the thing. I took the mounting, there's like a flat mounting bar that goes with the switch panel that's made to mount to a flat surface. I took that, I drilled some holes in it, and I used pop rivets to pop rivet the ball mount to the back of the panel. And you can see that once it's all attached, it fits pretty well. The pop rivets aren't quite as flush as I really wanted them to be, but it works. And the only thing that's left to do that I didn't tidy up is these ears that you can see off the side of the switch panel. Someday I will go back and trim off those ears because they're ugly. But I was looking forward to getting this project done by the time I got here. So there they are. Oh, the fish box is a little off. I used fish box because there's only so many blanks, and I figured we'd never have a fish box in here. So that'll be obvious that that doesn't connect to anything. So hopefully when I get my next accessory, whatever that might be, I'll peel that one off. All right, so look, underglow. Interior lights, cool. Sweet. All right, this video has gone on long enough. I hope you guys have enjoyed what you've seen here. I know this hasn't been an exhaustive lift kit install, but I hope I covered some of the high points. Quick review, we've had the lift installed now for a couple months because it's taken me a while to get everything in order for this video, and we love it. It rides pretty good on the road. It still has just a rough enough feel that it still feels like a Jeep, but it absorbs the bumps a lot better than the factory suspension did. The lights are pretty cool. My wife loves using them just to sort of have some fun. We did finally get it off-road, and it performed really well. We got those sway bars disconnected, and she had a great time following me around in a group ride that we were in. So like the video if you like this kind of content, and please subscribe. Every time you guys do that, it tells me that I'm doing a good job and it makes me feel good. You want to make me feel good, don't you? Thanks. All right, folks, remember, get out there and wheel, and I'll catch you in the next one.